Thanks for checking out this video. In today's video, I'm going to discuss several themes and just talk about some ideas that are on my mind that I think are worth discussing. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept of alpha males in our culture. I want to talk a little bit about some life lessons that I learned from studying Canadian Aboriginal literature. And I want to talk a little bit about, where our culture is going and why I think it's unsustainable and why we should think about that. I was thinking everything in the world, the more educated you become, the more sophisticated you become, the more you see everything is just connected to everything else. So it's hard to start to view anything really as like completely independent or mutually exclusive from everything else. And where I'm going with this in one hand is just besides our society, I think is going down, and our birth rates are dropping, and part of that is because women are just choosing to have less children, especially as women, as a class of people become more educated, they're just choosing to have less kids. And one of the reasons, or a big contributing factor to this, is that educated women, because they are educated, can see that they're losing. The biggest reason for the declining birth rates is people just literally cannot afford to have kids. So unless we fix the economy, that it's a non-starter. But even if the economy were a bit better, a lot of women are choosing not to have kids because they also don't have literal hope for the future. And they don't have hope for the future because they understand that a bunch of our systems are literally not sustainable. So they don't know, should I be bringing a kid into this world if this is going to crash over the next 20 years? So the economics are one thing, but another thing is our society is it's a novel and an unnatural environment. It's a mismatch evolutionary for our actual brains and who we are as animals. So I want to bring up the fact that we are an evolved ape. We are sapiens, we're Homo sapiens, but we are emotionally and psychologically no different from apes. We are apes. The only thing that separates us from them is intellect. And along with that, I don't really know precisely what I mean by that word, because I'm referring also to meta-consciousness, which comes with intellect. But intellectually, we are different from the apes. We are unique and special. But emotionally and psychologically, we are apes. And if you don't understand that, then you won't understand yourself as an individual or us as a species. This is one of my issues I have with fundamentalist Christianity, because if you preach or you convince people that we are the product of just spontaneous divine creation with no link to evolution, I can believe we are intelligently designed if you believe that evolution is God's process for designing things intelligently. That makes sense. But to not understand that we are shaped by our evolutionary history as what we are as a type of evolved ape is to so fundamentally misunderstand what we are that you'll be lost forever. And I'm not saying that we don't have souls or anything like that, but I'm just saying that our psychology and the type of thoughts that we think and why we have our reactions the way we do cognitively are the process of evolutionary history. So one of the other reasons our society is not sustainable is because we have this huge problem with narcissism. And the reason we have this problem with narcissism is because it's the system that we've arbitrarily designed, that we're not really evolved for, is taking a trait in the species that normally would be controlled or kept to less than 1% of the population, is now in arbitrary conditions where it's actually thriving. And I'm talking psychopathy. I'm talking about a spectrum of personality disorders and negative types of psychology, basically. Psychopathy, sociopathy, different problems, and malignant narcissism. And if you understood our tribal background more, you would have, and if you understood more about primatology, you'd understand sort of how we have evolved to deal with these problems, and why in the modern world with all the technology and the structures and things that we have in place, why this is sort of fucking this up. Capitalism, as Western capitalism specifically, is pure competition, and it runs counter to having a sense of community. And when you destroy community, people become alienated, and that's actually really bad psychologically for us, because we are an ape that are meant to be living in a community, and psychology and everything is sort of designed for that. And so once we start living in these alienated worlds, people get a little loopy. This is something that I am always self-conscious of, because I myself am pretty alienated, and I don't really feel like I have a support network or a community. I don't eat group meals with people or family or anything like that. So I just have to remind myself that, like, the way my lifestyle is very unnatural for the type of animal that I am, but I've adapted to it, and in a bunch of different ways, and it just is what it is. And I think I'm handling it better than a lot of other people, because it's just unnatural. So we have this problem with, like, a culture that we developed, like, started off like broadly speaking, like Western culture became capitalism, and then it spread throughout the world, and now we just have this hyper materialistic, superficial, atomized, late stage capitalist culture that we're living in, right? And we're seeing the destruction of community and all of this stuff, right? So this is like an unfortunate thing. And there's a book that I really like. It's called Tribe by Sebastian Junger, on homecoming and belonging. And it's short. It's more like a glorified essay, really. You can read this quickly. I really wish everybody would read this, because he was a veteran, a combat veteran I think he was a Marine. And he got out of the military and he dealt with it, PTSD and stuff like that, and overcame. But he talked about it, and one of the things he highlights a bunch of things, but the whole point being that we crave, like, a sense of community and meaning and longing. So a lot of people join the military and go to war, which is horrible. But then when their time is up, they don't want to leave the army, and that's because they form these bonds with their friends there that they'd rather die than just be living like a lonely, atomized life in a city somewhere, like in that movie Rambo, kind of. Because that bond and that meaning that they got from that is so intense that it means a lot more than anything else, right? Another thing that I didn't really connect the dot here, but way more American soldiers die by suicide than are killed in combat. And I always figured that was because of PTSD and not getting treatment and all that stuff, but the insight I kind of missed was that it's not just PTSD, but it's a certain type of perpetrator PTSD, because they realize they are the bad guys most of the time. You know, if you're an American and you went over to Iraq and you killed a bunch of brown kids, once you realize what you've actually done, you're not defending freedom or anything like that. You're just killing people so rich people can get oil. That must be just really hard to live with that, and then a lot of people just off themselves, because they don't, the human mind, if you're a healthy human being, you shouldn't really be capable of inflicting violence on other people without a serious, like, toll on yourself. And the small amount of people that can do that are psychopathic, and they are a danger, because if they're not engaged in warfare abroad, then they'll come home and just be aggressive to people domestically. And so they're this really delicate problem that we have to sort of figure out how to deal with these people. And the American military industrial complex is like a machine that just capitalizes on the people and, like, sets them loose, and in the name of empire in the Middle East or South America, wherever, to go wreak havoc, because those people love inflicting violence on people. These are basically evil people. And one of the huge problems that we have in our culture now is the misunderstanding of alpha males. And we live in a pseudoscience and toxic masculine bullshit that fundamentally misunderstands what an alpha male is. If you want to understand alpha males, you don't study wolves or something stupid like that. You study primates, because we are primates. In the 1980s, there was a primatologist, Franz de Waal, that wrote a book about alpha male chimpanzees, and the Republican Party picked up on this, and it became really influential in their rhetoric and their way of framing things. And then also, like, corporations picked up on this book and started writing books about how to be alpha in the boardroom, how to be alpha in politics. And over time, the writer Franz de Waal came to seriously regret writing that book and to change his opinion on things. But the earlier ideas that he put out there are kind of infiltrated politics. And he's basing all this in decades and decades of studying primates. And one of the big misconceptions in our culture about alpha males is that one of the key traits of being an alpha male in a primate chimpanzee pack, or bonobos anywhere, is that bonobos are a different thing. Never mind that. But with chimpanzees, the alpha male has to be very empathetic. One of his primary roles is conflict resolution. And we have this idea that alpha male in our culture is synonymous with, like, being a bully and a tough guy and having no emotions and, like, being able to do this, and that's not an actual true alpha male. And we're kind of, the Andrew Tate kind of idea, like, that's a maladjusted emotionally stunted person with serious issues that's very toxic and doesn't actually understand like what an alpha male is. There's a bunch of traits, and one of the big ones is empathy, and that's just the theme that I'm always talking about, because our society is like it lacks empathy, and this is a problem with modern life. I just think this is worth like reflecting on, thinking about. Like, we don't live in a love-based society. There's always trade-offs. I never have answers, because like I need modern medicine and for modern comfort, and I wouldn't want to live like a caveman or a primitive man necessarily, with a short lifespan and all these other super painful experiences physically. But you know, the sense of meaning in life is much more natural and better. And I don't, you know, there's this propaganda that comes out of a lot of like conservative think tanks that all these Western tribal people around the world are all primitive and savage. It's not true. A lot of them are just, they're living a lot more naturally, so they're happier and loving. And my point is that like primitive tribes, I think, can have a much more loving society than we can have today in this world of capitalism. And it's just a fundamentally sort of toxic situation, because I wish that we lived in a genuinely love-oriented society, and we can't really as a species develop that because of all these problems we have now. I wish that people would check out this movie I talk about a lot, Quest for Fire. It's an excellent movie with a really realistic depiction of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens meeting and mixing about 80,000 years ago, and demonstrating all these different aspects of evolution that were part of, like, you know, what contributed to modern man, like, you know, developing language and projectiles and learning to make fire, and where hierarchy comes from, and the way they live physically as a group, and what they had to do. Like, once you understand all this as a framework for where we came from, it and how that's how our modern minds work, then you see things more clearly. And so one thing, I'll make this video, I'll keep this video relatively short. Our biggest misconception as a culture that we have about alpha males is that they're somehow supposed to be like emotionally shut off and bullies, and that's not the idea. And they have to be good at understanding people and being empathetic so that they can actually manage the group properly. Occasionally a tyrant kind of bully chimpanzee will achieve an alpha male status, but then they just get ripped apart by all the other chimps. That's what I mean by today we have like a corrupt government, but it's not possible for a bunch of males to get together and just go literally rip the arms off the prime minister, like, because this is sort of a hyper technological like world. That was like, it's not like that. But if we were just primates living in a more primitive society, we would literally just go kill the tyrant leader. And so now we're kind of locked into this society that's falling apart. So one other thing I want to talk about then is that in regards to alienation and being a white man, and I think people should think about this. When I was studying literature and getting my degree in English lit at Carleton, I studied a lot of Aboriginal lit, so Aboriginal Canadian writers that were writing in English, which is a relatively new thing, obviously. But I studied a lot of works by Aboriginal writers, and contrasting and comparing like their cultural values a lot with, you know, this colonial mentality. And I think they have a lot of things right that we've lost as white people. One is this sense of, this is the main point I want to get at, that community, like health, mental health and everything is really about being like part of the community, and being shunned and being completely alienated is you know, like, is worse than death for a lot of people. That's why the people get banished from tribes. And so the point is it's this concept of healing that Aboriginal Canadians, a lot of them, different groups, have this understanding that when men or women, when people have to go away and engage in violence, it's traumatic, whether or not it happens to them or they have to inflict it on other people. Because if you're an empathetic, loving person, and strong men are empathetic, like if situations have forced you into this situation where you're gonna have to engage in violence, it's traumatic. It harms you. And so when the trauma is over and the conflict is over, you have to come back. And the Aboriginal tribal mindset is we have to, as a group, help this person heal and reintegrate into the tribe. And if that person doesn't come back and reintegrate into the tribe, he's basically toast. Because it's a group effort that way. And that's what we don't have. Like, our veterans are screwed because we go send them over there like, you know, cannon fodder in the Middle East for some imperialist agenda. Then we bring them back here, and then we just, America, for example, Canada, we just kind of set them loose. You're on your own. This is capitalism. And, you know, they all end up homeless and stuff. There's no way for them to like integrate back into the tribe. They never heal. And even if they, like, and a lot of what they're dealing with is the understanding that, like, they shouldn't have done what they did because they were too young to really understand what they were doing. And, you know, there's something about that. And that's why it's almost like a karmic thing or a spiritual lesson you might have to learn, I guess, like if you believe in a bigger picture about things. Because like truly empathetic people, if you like, I had this when I was younger in high school. I was never tempted to join the army, even when, like, because I was all, even when I was a young guy, I was like, I don't want to kill human beings if I don't have to. So I'm just like, I just don't want to do this. But a lot of other guys are like young, dumb, and full of cum, and they just want to be like macho, and they watch a lot of movies. Like, I'm going to join the army and go over there and kill some towel heads, and they blew up, the World Trade Center. I'm going to go be a macho. And then they come back and they have PTSD and they whine and they bitch, and I do feel empathy for them, or sympathy at least to a point. But I'm also like, yeah, but like, why'd you even go in the first place? I know you were lied to, but why didn't you have like an inbuilt sort of sense of like, I just don't want to kill people unless I really like have to. And these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, all the stuff that I've lived through like in my lifetime, like completely not necessary. It's just plundering people for their wealth and their resources. And that's the thing about Yamnaya descended people that I was getting at. As a white guy, right? Like, you can see my features. I'm a Western European person. My Western European, like European culture, the West really, is patriarchal and all these other things because it inherits a legacy from Yamnaya people, which are a group of people that evolved in the Steeps Mountains as pastoralists, so they had to raid each other for resources, and that raiding meant constant like warfare, so they started to worship men as their main leader. That's why like agricultural societies are usually matriarchies, pastoral societies become patriarchal for a reason, worship the strongest male, then they go and they conquer people. So inherent in Yamnaya descended people is a mentality of like we're entitled to take what we physically can. That's colonialism is just a continuation of the Yamnaya people's conquest ethic. Like, they came out of the steeps into both Europe and in Persia, but into Europe and took advantage of a plague that had killed off a lot of the men in the agriculturalist zones of Europe, and then they came in there, killed all the men and raped the women. And so this is what I'm saying, is that inherent in like Yamnaya descended people and cultures is this ethic of like, I'm just going to kill and take everything. And it's, you look at other civilizations, like there's Mesopotamia, there's ancient Egypt, but there's also the Indus Valley civilization and other societies that were evolving that didn't have no indication of having any kind of military or anything like that. And it's probably because they were started off agricultural and spiritual and religious and just didn't have that mentality of like, let's build armies and go invade someone else and take their shit. Like, it's all part of like, it all has a long legacy historically into the psychology of like even white people today living in a colony like Canada in North America. My whole point is that alienation and our system is toxic and it's not sustainable. We need to address that if people want a future. And it's unsustainable for a bunch of reasons, economically, but also like just the way it's set up to reward certain behavior and take away our ability to like enforce certain things as a group. And we're not supposed to really be living as completely atomized individuals. So the fact that we're losing any sense of like real community is also like relevant. So anyway, these are all just the thoughts I was having today that I want to share with you guys, because I think that this is all worth thinking about. So anyway, if anyone has any feedback or thoughts on what I just said, please feel free to share them. I'd love it. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.